Welcome to Bedrock Bookkeepers Online Academy for another awesome segment. My name is Joe DiChara, again inviting you to our site bedrockbookkeeping.com. We are constantly updating our content, our videos, our courses, all for you, the student that wants to learn about bookkeeping and the business of bookkeeping. Again, that's bedrockbookkeeping.com, and we welcome your feedback and suggestions, anything that can help us improve your experience with us. Enjoy the next segment. Thank you. Chapter 9, QuickBooks, Excel, and Other Bookkeeping Alternatives. Before we get into this chapter, let me state that owning a copy of QuickBooks does not make somebody a bookkeeper. The same way that owning a hammer does not make me a carpenter. Now, my family knows that I'm no carpenter, even though I own a couple of hammers, a couple of screwdrivers. I may even have a saw in the house, but I'm not going to try to do any carpentry work. Tried that a long time ago and it didn't work out too well. Anyway, the question is, why do people buy QuickBooks, or why have people bought QuickBooks in the past thinking that they can do their own bookkeeping? And the answer is simple. In 1994, Intuit bought a company called Parsons Technology, which had a program called Money Counts, which I was using. So I've actually been using QuickBooks before it was even QuickBooks. But what Intuit did was they came up with this ingenious, unique selling proposition, which was simply you can save money by doing your own bookkeeping. You don't hear them saying that anymore because they know, as well as the public, that that's simply not true. A small business owner should not be doing their own books unless they are a startup, like I said, and they only have a few transactions. I list the volume of transactions as being around 20, 25 transactions. Once you hit that point, you really need to start looking at getting a professional bookkeeper in place. So now the epiphany about that came to me when I realized that small business owners really should be doing their own books in the beginning. And I believe I stated that in the last couple of chapters. Primarily for the fact that, the small business owner can get an understanding, an idea of the financial process. So also what I realized was that not everybody needs QuickBooks. You see, I taught so many people to do their own books using QuickBooks, and that turned out to be a big mistake. What I realized today is that you don't need to use QuickBooks. QuickBooks is only a tool. It's one of the methods to create books and records. QuickBooks itself is not a set of books and records. In fact, as I stated previously, no government or insurance agency has ever asked me for their QuickBooks file. What they ask for are the books and records. Now, you can use QuickBooks to print out your general ledger, your financial reports, but again, they're not looking for the QuickBooks file. Now, you can use Excel, you can use a simple pencil and paper. And that being said, I am going to go over some of the features of QuickBooks to help you along, to show you some of the things that you can do in QuickBooks. Now, QuickBooks itself is too big a program. There's too many moving parts, and it's beyond the scope of this course. And because of what I just said, I'm not going to teach you everything about QuickBooks. What I'm going to teach you is, if you're going to use QuickBooks, this is some of the things that you need to know. And one of them is setting up your chart of account. Now, this goes back to the first couple of chapters where we talked about your balance sheet, your income statement, the trial balance, which is really, when you look at your trial balance, it is your chart of accounts. It is it lists all of your categories in order from the assets, the cash, current assets, fixed assets, all the way down to your expenses. That is your chart of accounts. And the way that you create a chart of accounts in QuickBooks is it is actually called a list. So if you have QuickBooks open, you go to list and you open up chart of accounts, and QuickBooks actually has their own chart of accounts, which I have to change and you might have to change to mirror what your financials look like. So your chart of accounts need to look like your finished balance sheet and your trial balance. And you'll see if you ever start with a clean copy of QuickBooks and you see the chart that they give you, it's nowhere close to being really what a balance sheet is supposed to look like. It's missing a bunch of accounts. So anyway, this is how you're going to create your chart of accounts. You get to this screen. Let's go back there a second, because so now what you do is you open up your list, you go to your chart of accounts, this comes out, and then what you want to do is you want to hit account here, and it'll bring you to this screen which says choose the type of account. So you'll see income and expenses. Those are the categories that go on an income statement. But down here they have a couple of unfamiliar categories, and that's because of the way QuickBooks is structured. So what we want is we want to create a bank account. Everything else, if you go down here, you'll see it's other account types. So this is where you'll have your other current assets, your other assets, your current liabilities. Really, these things should be up here, but that's the way QuickBooks was structured. And so when you hit continue, you're going to come to a screen like this. And it's categorized as an expense because you said it was an expense over here. So now the thing is, you could actually change it over here. If you decide, oh, I didn't want expense, I wanted income. Now I use a numbering system. This is where you put the number and you put the name of the account. Now this is, almost filled in. That's the bad debt account. We don't want too much of that. And then we have, if you want to make a sub account. Now if you remember, we have the main categories, which is, let's say, cash, and then underneath that you would have your operating account, your payroll account. Those are what they call sub accounts. So now in this example, I'm making a sub account of auto lease. So this is my category, this is the number, and I'm making it a subcategory of automobile expenses. And then over here we could see it, and this is how it's laid out in QuickBooks. Now let me make a point here. I call that they are categories on a balance sheet, an income statement, even though we call it an account in QuickBooks and we call it a chart of accounts. Really, it's a chart of categories, and I want to make that distinction because what I call an account is something like a bank account, a credit card account. Those accounts where I went in back in a few chapters ago, I talked about these are the accounts where the transactions flow through. Now, once you have your account set up, I'm going to show you here how to enter a check. So if you look up here, this is your QuickBooks menu. Now, I'm not going to go through the navigation features in QuickBooks. That's for a QuickBooks course. But up here in the menu field, you can get to anything in QuickBooks. And in this instance, we're going to go to write a check. And what happens is one of the dangers of QuickBooks, because it's a check, as opposed to entering this in a journal. So what this should be going into in a real accounting system is a cash disbursements journal. But we're going to do it QuickBooks way, and it looks like a check. And over here, so it looks like a check, And over here, because QuickBooks, you can print checks, and we're not going into that, but this is where you would put the check number. Now remember those 5 items that I said you need. You need to know what account it's coming from, what account is the check being paid out of, the date, the payee, the amount, and the category down here. And this is what a full transaction looks like. We have the account, the payee, the date, the amount, and the category, professional fees. Now this is how you make a deposit. Same menu item, you make a deposit. The deposit screen comes up. Now we need the account. You can't see this here, but this is the operating account. The date, who it was received from, the payor, the category, and the amount. Same 5 things. Now this would go into a cash receipts journal, which QuickBooks doesn't formally produce, which is why it's not even really a bookkeeping program. See, QuickBooks, the idea was Intuit created Quicken, which was a personal finance program. And doing it, structuring it this way was fine for a personal finance. So what they did was they took a bookkeeping program, Money Counts, and they tweaked it to make it sort of look like Quicken. These guys weren't accountants. They were marketing geniuses, and they were software programmers. They were very successful also. Now, let's talk about some of the other alternatives. In Chapter 1, Chapter 2, Chapter 3, Chapter 4, I showed you how to do a simple bookkeeping system, a simple accounting system. And you can do that the same way that I started doing it when I started 30 years ago, with the pencil and paper. That's what we used. That's pretty much all we used. Yes, some companies had computer systems, but they didn't have accounting programs per se. Maybe the larger companies did, but think about before there were even computers. Guess what? We still did tax returns. We still created books and records before computers. Computers are only a means of doing the detail. Computers are good for compiling the numbers, and another program that's good for adding and subtracting and compiling numbers is Excel or any other kind of spreadsheet program. Now you also have some other online bookkeeping programs, and there's more and more coming out. You know, QuickBooks wasn't the only software desktop program. There were others. But the fact of the matter is that QuickBooks became the 800-pound gorilla because they cornered almost 85% of the small business market. Now, let me also add that in the beginning, the first versions of QuickBooks were adequate to do what you needed to do bookkeeping. With every new version, all they did were add bells and whistles. QuickBooks has become way too complicated for the average entrepreneur. It does way too many things that aren't even part of bookkeeping. For instance, they will sell you credit card and merchant accounts. You can incorporate or probably hire a lawyer through QuickBooks. Okay, you can create a to-do list. You have a calendar. None of that has to do with books and records or bookkeeping. So besides the other options, if you still want to go with a desktop program, there's still some of them out there. But most people are going with online version. QuickBooks Online is still available. It's not that expensive, but it is still awful. And QuickBooks Online is not the same as the desktop version. Now, I came across this company called Wave Apps. If you go to waveapps.com, it reminds me of QuickBooks when it first started. You can enter a check, you can enter a deposit, you can reconcile. It's very simple, and it's free. you could also collaborate with your accountant or your bookkeeper. So if you want to be an entrepreneur and do your own books, this is a very good alternative. Wave apps, it's simple, it's free, you can even do payroll on it. And the payroll service is very inexpensive. There's another company called Zero, which I've seen some mixed reviews on that, but again, it's an adequate bookkeeping program. It's not free, but it's pretty inexpensive. And that wraps up Chapter 9. We're 75% through the course. We only have 3 chapters left, and the 3 chapters should be pretty quick. They're not long chapters. And again, I hope you enjoyed this segment as much as I have. That's Chapter 9. QuickBooks and other bookkeeping alternatives. I look forward to seeing you for Chapter 10. Thank you. And that wraps up another awesome episode of Bedrock Bookkeepers Online Academy. Joe DiChiara here, inviting you back to our site bedrockbookkeeping.com. Check us out for the latest and greatest offers, discounts, updates and content, videos, new courses. Okay, again, bedrockbookkeeping.com. Joe DiChiara, over and out. Looking forward to seeing you at the next segment.